welcome back to Room 237, and I've got another review for a Giallo homage film, or tribute homage, not an official Giallo, but this is a movie that you'll probably see on other review channels, putting it in Giallo playlist, calling it a Giallo, but it's very much like, Strange Color of Your Body's Tears, or even Abracadabra and Sono Profondo, along with other movies that I will be getting to. But unlike those, this is actually a comedy. This is kind of a satire or a parody of Giallo and its conventions. And it's the 2014 Canadian film, The Editor, which it's Canadian, so it's not a Giallo. But I picked this up recently, and this is the DVD Blu-ray combo pack from Scream Factory. Does come with reversible artwork, so you can either have this or you can have this. I flipped it to this so I could have both. But I do like this cover, but I like this even more. I love it when throwback movies do very simplistic, VHS looking covers. I do think this kind of makes it look more like a slasher film, but I still like this cover. There's also one where it looks like a strip of film, where it also looks like in the shape of a scalpel, but like one side of it is like the profile shape of a woman's face. I think that's kind of interesting. And yeah, this is a parody or a satire. It's a comedy. And not full out like, say, Scary Movie, but I would call this like the Giallo equivalent of like what Tucker and Dale vs. Evil did for slasher films. And it was produced and directed by a group called Astron 6, who I think they broke up recently, but it consisted of basically 5 guys, Adam Brooks, Jeremy Gillespie, Matt Kennedy, Connor Sweeney, and Steven Kostanski, who made a lot of humorous, dark comedy love letters to 80s kind of sci-fi and horror films, which actually, and oftentimes more than one will direct a film. Like this one was actually directed by both Brooks and Kennedy, but Gillespie and Kostanski went on to direct the 2016 film, The Void, which I've heard mixed things about. I wanted to see The Void because I know it's very 80s centric, but that's darker and more of a showcase for creature and gore effects. But they did other movies like Father's Day. They did the W for Wish and ABCs of Death 2. I did not know they did Leprechaun Returns, and they did Psycho Gorman, which was their last film before they broke up. But so yeah, this one is directed by Adam Brooks and Matthew Kennedy, who also star in the film. They kind of remind me of like Broken Lizard, the guys that did Super Troopers, because they're all in the film as well. But you also have people like Lawrence R. Harvey, who was in the second and third Human Centipede film. You have Udo Kier, who's one of the biggest character actors. I mean, it's this guy. I mean, he was in Suspiria, he was in Three Mothers, just to name some Italian films, among, many more. And, yeah, Adam Brooks is the star. Matthew Kennedy, I believe, is the one that plays the inspector. Yes, he's the inspector. It doesn't necessarily look like a 70s Giallo. I mean, you do have a lot of like lighting that looks much like an Argento film, but it still kind of looks like a modern film. It doesn't have a lot of filters with grain or grit or anything like that. There are some scenes that have like the little cigarette burns up in the corner, which they make note of. And yeah, it's more, it's not like Scary Movie where it's kind of hard to explain, but the comedy is more in just making fun of the conventions and more in jokes for fans of the genre. You know, for example, there's a joke about dubbing. You know, like one of the a character who's an actor in the film within the film gets killed. They get a look-alike, but he can't speak English, so they say, that's what dubbing's for. A lot of jokes like that. It is fairly bloody and gory. Two very different kinds. I mean, you have the gore of the film within the film, which is kind of more over the top, cheesy looking, but then you get the more realistic stuff in the real world. But I love how it's filmed. It's actually more of a blend of, you know, looking like a classic film and modern. But everyone has Italian names. I mean, there's Claudio, Francesco, Ray Ciso, or Ciso. You know, everyone has Italian names, even though I think it takes place in America. But I could be wrong. But they do talk about speaking English. They all do wear the kind of costumes you would see in a Giallo. Like the inspector has like this like dark mustard colored turtleneck with a brown blazer. And you have characters with weird quirks that you would see in a Giallo. Like the inspector has a thing for slapping women because if you've seen enough Giallo, you know women are always getting slapped. It doesn't make a joke about J&B or whiskey or red telephones or spiral staircases. I know some people would say it's a garbage film because they didn't make jokes about that. You know, on the internet, one tiny detail will ruin a whole thing. Just go look at my comments for the Dexter New Blood episode 9 review. How people will not stop talking about, you know, using ketamine versus M99. It's ridiculous. Tiny details. But story-wise, you have Adam Brooks, who at one point was like the greatest film editor ever. Now, it's not that he has one hand, but he has no fingers on one hand. And he's doing these really cheap Giallo-style films for a guy named Francesco. There's even another director named Umberto in this. I thought that was a nice touch. And people on set are being killed. They're being killed off. And their fingers are being cut off. That's sort of the MO of the killer. So, Inspector Porphyry, played by Kennedy, he spends the whole film really trying to catch the editor. He thinks the editor is the killer. And the rest is just kind of this over-the-top. Everything's over the top. A lot of the acting, just a very convoluted plot, convoluted twists. I love how when they show scenes of the film within the film, which I think it's called like Tarantolo or something like that. It deals with tarantulas. It's like a Giallo that deals with tarantulas, which could be a nod to Black Belly of the Tarantula, but there's another scene with the inspector in the library and all these tarantulas are coming at him. That's a blatant reference to Fulci's The Beyond, which isn't a Giallo, but they reference other Italian films. I've seen people call The Beyond a Giallo, which it baffles me. But also, like, the editor's wife, who's played by Paz de la Huerta, she was an actress who, you know, was fired and people have forgotten about her, and now she's like, she doesn't even like to hear about the set, and she's very self-centered. It's all about her life and her struggles, and she's captivated by all the different actors in the films that he's editing. Like, he's magnificent, he's so sexy, just because of some of his acting techniques. but when they show the actors, their acting is over the top, like what you would see in a Giallo. Like one of the writers, because it was written by Brooks Kennedy and Connor Sweeney. Connor Sweeney is the guy that plays. He was kind of a supporting character, but then he works his way up to lead when the lead actor gets killed off. But when we see the acting in it, it's just like, damn, we will catch the killer. He can't get away. Like, it just... And they do a good job at making it look silly and over the top. You know, then Ray Ciso, the editor, he has his assistant, who I think was Bella, played by Samantha Hill, who looked familiar. She was, I guess she's mostly known for stage. Yeah. But also, like, the inspector's wife, she had some sort of job on the film set, and she witnessed one of the crime scenes, and she got, like, that condition where someone sees something so horrific that they go blind, and they have, like, white eyes, and it looks a lot like The Beyond. So they do reference a lot of other Italian films, but like there's also the inspector is into very rough sex. Like he meets the actress that Connor Sweeney's character, the now lead actor, is dating. And when they meet, they just say how, oh yeah, we used to be lovers. And she's like, he was such a strong and passionate lover. Even though her husband or whatever is now standing right there. And we get a flashback to where it's pouring rain. They're both wearing sweaters. She's running through the woods in slow motion. And he stops her. And he, like, slaps her. She's down on the ground. He just keeps fucking slapping her. And then they start making out. And he just takes this mud and, like, rubs it all over his face. And does, like, Tarzan stuff. But then when it shows him doing that with his wife, like, he breaks a wine bottle and all the glass lands on her body, which I can't remember if that was Mrs. Ward or All Colors of the Dark, but it was one of the two. Then another scene where, you know, he's playing fetch with his wife's, you know, seeing eye dog, and he throws the stick and it runs into these bushes under a bridge. And he's like, yeah, bring it back, bring it back. And I'm like, if that dog brings back a hand, I swear to God. And it does. It brings back a hand with no fingers. And I'm like, opening to New York Ripper, another Fulci film, which is a Giallo. So it has a lot of references to other films within the genre, or at least in Italian cinema. There's also a scene where we see Ray Ciso's wife reading a book, in which she closes it and sets it down. It's Three Mothers, so a nice little nod to Argento. And it also does a good job at trying to focus, like sending our focus elsewhere, like for red herrings. Like for a while, I thought it might be his assistant. She seems to be, because she's kind of secretive with some of the film she's cutting. But then we see she's trying to catch the killer in the office so she can clear out Ray Ciso's name. Then I was thinking it must be, you know, Carl Ornitz, I think it was, which is Connor Sweeney's character. So it does a good job with that. Also, the music, I got to give credit to the music because they credited a few people. Jeremy Gillespie, who actually isn't in the film, but he's part of Astron 6, which Astron 6 but also Carpenter Brut, Norman Orenstein, and Claudio Simonetti of Goblin. And there are some very good Goblin-esque pieces in this. Like, especially the part where it shows Ray Cecil laying in bed with his wife, and he's looking around the room, and he just sees this shadowy figure standing by a coat rack, but just the eyes are visible. It's a very creepy, effective image. I thought that was very well done. But that music sounds very Goblin-esque. Also, the scene where the inspector's wife is in the kitchen and the door gets locked, so she's stuck in the kitchen with her seeing eye dog and the killer, but of course she's blind. That music also very well done, very Goblin sounding. Which I also like that scene because her father, his wife's father is like his superior officer, and he tells her, if my daughter's any more affected, you're just gonna be like a meter maid. So there's all this pressure on him, and he keeps puking. But he's trying to axe down the door, which I like this scene because the killer's holding her head against the door with like a knife to her throat. But when the axe comes through, it's kind of like House by the Cemetery when Bob's got his head against the door, which is actually that scene. It's got that great red and blue lighting around it. But then it's just like this crazy moment where he finally gets the door panel free. The killer moves her in the way and he just axes her right in the head. Which then leads to this other parody of the inept police force. Yes, there's this patrol officer, I think, named Giancarlo, who then comes in and he sees the inspector covered in blood with a bloody axe, his wife with a huge axe gash in her face, and yet the inspector is able to convince him that the killer was here. He like pours him a drink, gives it to him. He takes a sip, but he doesn't, and he's just like, well, you've been drinking on the job, so you don't quite know what you saw. And he says it was a black figure. He takes it as black man. He's like, well, that's what you're saying, not me. And you've been drinking, so no one can trust what you say. And he's able to convince him of that. So he's a totally inept. He's a complete moron. And then they send him undercover, the Giancarlo guy, to be the replacement editor because Cecil gets fired. Which there's also this nice little joke about how the directors learn how to edit on this. This is what our next film's going to be put on. And he's like, it's just a little black box. How do I get the film out of it? It's just a little beta tape. I know I'm kind of all over the place with this review, but I watched this last night, and one thing that really impressed me was, well, first, it does get a little bit into the supernatural. It does kind of get into, like, Beyond type stuff, which I don't think a Giallo needs, but for a parody, I see why, just to make it more over the top and convoluted. But, and according to Lawrence R. Harvey, who, Human Centipede 2 guy, and 3, I gotta say that, or else people will tell me as if I don't know. He's a priest in this church that the editor goes to. He tells the inspector that the editor has these powers to sort of switch between realms, the real world and the netherworld. So there are some scenes where Ray Cecil will like go through like this portal, or even like it is a medicine cabinet, and he'll be in this like Twilight Zone looking netherworld, it looks great. I mean, yeah, there's some CGI, but the cinematography and lighting and even CGI of those weird, very supernatural scenes are very well done. And this was a movie that was funded by Indiegogo. Or they spent all their budget on like the first portion and then they had to do it Indiegogo. Then they decided to just direct it themselves. And the CGI and everything in that little fantasy world looks way better than shit in like big budget Hollywood movies. So that impressed me. I didn't quite think they needed that whole realm crossing aspect, but in the context of parody and just making it as convoluted and outrageous as possible, it makes sense. But like some of the other deaths, I mean, we see one guy get stabbed in the throat, bunch of blood comes out. There's a scene where the blonde guy, who kind of acted like a young Carrie Elwes, he reminded me of a young Carrie Elwes, which, when it comes to the inspector, there's a scene where he kind of does his little spaz out thing, and Lawrence R. Harvey is like young Donald Sutherland. He does kind of look like him. But Connor Sweeney's character, the now lead actor, he's having sex with his wife or a girlfriend, and the killer comes up and takes a chainsaw to her shoulder, and blood's going everywhere. The blood and gore effects are pretty well done. Even the super fake looking ones that are more dead alive. Like there's a scene in the film within the film where the inept cops are like, "All right, woman, I'm willing to bet, $5,000 that this is a mask." So he goes like this, but then it's just like meat, teeth, and eyeballs. And the eyeballs are like, and she's just like screaming. And it's wicked silly looking, and then he just kind of like mushes the face back on, and you can tell it's like a mask, but then it cuts and her face is normal. And that's the film within the film. So they do a good job at making the movie itself over the top and silly, but the film within the film being even more over the top and silly. Both good parodies of the Giallo genre. And yeah, a lot of the humor does lie in the tropes, but there's also just there's a scene where Ray Ciso is out with his wife, and he's trying to say, the police were at the studio again today questioning me, and she's like, I thought we were going to talk about us, you're just talking about you, and just like, I feel sick from eating this, because they're at a restaurant, and the inspector walks in unannounced and just slaps her, and then he looks at at Ray Ciso, and he's like, I've been tailing you for so many hours. I can't take it anymore. Get your wife under control. I will be there to do it for you next time. He has a thing for slapping women. And then it gets into the whole thing where, well, earlier on, it's hinted at that Ray Ciso spent time in an institute, which is run by Udo Kier. Which I like how every time a scene ends, we see Udo Kier be like, weird, really weird, which is perfect. But, and you find out he suffered, well, I guess I'll get into spoilers, but even though I don't think it really matters because it is a parody, but it still does have a good twist. It does have a good twist for who the killer is, but then it just has this outrageous other twist that almost doesn't even make sense. But also, even as the movie goes on, it gets to the point where Ray Ciso can't tell the difference between normal in reality, or normal in reality and fake, you know, like what he sees in film. I thought it was going to be because he's edited so many films that he can't tell what he's looking at or what he's experiencing. And there is a part where, like, he's brushing his teeth or whatever, and those cigarette burns up in the corner keep popping up. And he looks at the camera, and then he looks up in the corner, and he goes like this. I thought that was a nice touch. But there's more to it than that. And that ties into the whole supernatural element with being able to cross over to the netherworld and whatnot. But there's also a cool Videodrome effect where this beta got sent to his apartment and his wife was watching it, where she's like falling in love with Connor Sweeney's character. He takes the beta out and it like pulsates. I was like, that's a cool Videodrome effect. But yeah, I actually got to go back and read what exactly is the ending, because it's very confusing. And I thought they were making it just confusing and like not knowing what's going on purpose, but I guess there actually is a reason. But so I guess I'll get to spoilers, but if you love the Giallo genre, there is a lot to enjoy about this, especially the in-jokes about the tropes and everything. But they also have a lot of fun references to other films like New York Ripper, The Beyond, nods to Argento, Umberto Lenzi. It's got a lot of Argento-esque lighting. There's also a lot of Brian De Palma split screens, which people will say Dress to Kill and Blowout is a Giallo. Those are not either, but some people just don't want to learn. But there's a lot to be gained, and I think it is very funny. I wouldn't say it's as funny as, say, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, but I still had quite a few good laughs. And there's plenty of blood and gore as well, and the acting's pretty well done. I mean, it's supposed to be over the top and silly, but it works. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the editor. I thought this was a fun movie. But with that, I'm going to get into spoilers, so. So the scene where the inspector's in the library and all the tarantulas come at him, kind of like in The Beyond, he finds this book about the occult, and he brings it to the church, where Lawrence R. Harvey is, and tells him he's looking for Ray Ciso. He knows he's the killer, but he insists he can't be. He's a very righteous man. He's always come in here. But the inspector won't have it. He goes to Ray Ciso's house, where he finds a film reel case in his fireplace that has all the fingers of the victims in it. So he takes that as proof that Ciso is the killer, which at this point, Ciso crawls out of his editing machine, which at first, you know, he's covered in black tar, he's got like the crazy eyes, looking like the dark figure version of himself that we've been seeing throughout the film in his dreams or in his ability to transfer realities. But the inspector catches up to him by car. They have a very Giallo-style car chase. They go off a cliff. Ciso runs to the director's house, Francesco Mancini, that's the director's name, which we see him being approached by someone, and he's like, oh, it's you. We didn't think we're, something about, how dare you keep me waiting? So we know, okay, that's the killer, but it's not revealed yet. But also at this time, I mean, Ciso's assistant has been killed, and she was killed in the editing room, which there's a scene where, because he knows that she's been killed, So he rushes back to the studio. This is after he's been fired. And he's like, Bella's been killed. So the director says, someone get the inspector into the editing lab. He's like, I didn't say editing lab. I just said she was dead. How did you know? So just another one of those good little redirects or misdirects. But he gets the inspector to chase him all the way to the director's house, where the inspector holds him at gunpoint, but then sees that there's this ritual being held by the editor's wife, by Ciso's wife, where she admits she was the killer of everyone, she killed them all, and now she's some modern incarnation of death. So she's just sitting there screaming, call me death, call me death. And the inspector's splashing gas all over her. And a running gag throughout the film is that Ciso can't light a match because of his wooden hand. But the inspector is stabbed. He tries to shoot her, but she causes it to backfire, blows his fingers off. Which I like the effect because the rest of the sequence, his fingers are all just blasted off and kind of flopping around. But eventually, he sets his hand on fire, touches her, which she goes up. And I thought this was a nice effect. People will say it's cheap and fake looking, but if it's what they're going for, it makes sense. That they try to just show her face melting, so it looks like a wax figure. You know, not much blood or anything. Just the skin looks like melting wax, like a candle. But it's a good looking effect. And then the inspector tells Ciso that he's a free man, and he admits, well, the Connor Sweeney's character, the blonde actor, he did kill the new actor just so he could have a better part in the film. He did do that, but yeah, she did kill the rest. I thought that was funny. So then it's the next day, and this is where it got kind of confusing for me, and I thought they were just making it more convoluted than they needed to. But I was like, okay, I didn't see his wife being the killer, so good twist. But then the next day, the inspector goes into work, and he realizes that the inept patrol cop that that saw him in the kitchen with his dead wife, and he was a moron. Then they made him the undercover editor that replaced Ciso for a portion of the film, that didn't know how to edit anything. He was killed earlier in the film, but now he's alive, and he's full inspector. He solved the case. He got credit with it. And then Udo Kier shows up. Where he finds out he's like the staff psychiatrist of the station. So everything is different than what he's come to know from earlier events of the film. So he doesn't believe that, so he races to the church. He asks Lawrence R. Harvey about Ray Ciso, and he's like, I've never heard of him. I don't know who that guy is. He's like, you told me he fixed the bell tower so it could ring again. He says, that bell hasn't rung in over 100 years. It was like a completely different reality. Then he goes up to the bell tower to check. He breaks down this wall, and he finds some film reels with a skull on top, seemingly Ray Ciso's. And he opens up this film reel, and it's like film catching up to him. Like it sees him going to the church, then him finding the reels. Then he's actually looking at film of him looking at film. And then it ends with like it zooming out of this editing machine with him screaming at the camera and his eyes going white. And then we zoom out, it's in one of these. So it's like, it's this alternate reality that is like another film. And then there's a post-credit scene where Ray Ciso goes home to his wife, who's actually his assistant, Bella. So maybe Ray was able to get into that netherworld and change things around, or maybe it just got messed up somehow. But yeah, at first I thought they made it so nonsensical that it could be solved, just because, you know, hey, Giallo sometimes has confusing endings, so that's what we're gonna do. But it does make more sense. It makes more sense than I initially thought when I saw it. I don't really know what the definitive answer is. I'm sure someone will leave a comment that's like this long explaining it with a bunch of parentheses, but yeah, I thought this was a really fun film. Again, maybe not as funny as Tucker and Dale versus Evil, and even if you're not a huge fan of Giallo, or if you've never even seen a Giallo, I think there's enough, you know, dark, more so dry, but dark comedy to find it enjoyable. But yeah, I think they did a great job, from everything from the clothes that the characters wear, to the music, to a lot of the lighting, to even the references to past films, Italian and Italian Giallo. Just giving these characters odd quirks that you see a lot in the genre. And also just like the red herrings and the misdirects, I think all worked well. And the acting. Whether it be the acting or the film within the film, where it's supposed to be really, really bad. I think, you know, especially for one that was pretty much helmed by these 4 or 5 guys. I mean, they did have a crew, but it was very limited, made on a very small budget. Even the CGI, more like CGI scenes of him going through the different realms and going through that Twilight Zone area, looks way better than most of the CGI stuff in modern films. So yeah, I thought this was really fun. I really enjoyed the editor. So again, this is a Canadian Giallo parody, or like just a Canadian film that's a parody of Giallo, not a legitimate, you know, real Giallo. Again, you'll probably see playlists on YouTube or reviews of people lumping this in with real Giallo. It's not. This belongs in the same class as Strange Color Your Body's Tears, Amer or Amer, you know, Francesca, Sono Profondo, you know, Abracadabra, Censor and Malignant, you know, movies like that, even Dress to Kill and Blowout. But this is the comedy version of that. It doesn't go in the same class as Deep Red, Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Vice is a Locked Room, Vice and Mrs. Ward. It's not a real Giallo. I really got to point that out. But yeah, some people, I've seen people say, this is for the Giallo film. It's in my Giallo playlist, even though it's different. But yeah, I really like the editor. I had fun with it. Had plenty of good laughs. They did a good job at satirizing the genre. So I do have a big order of more Gialli coming in. I'll have about 12 more movies coming in altogether, all Giallo. So stay tuned for those. And I did finally watch, and I will review, Angel's Melancholy. Yes, I know my followers that only watch the extreme reviews, because the extreme, shocking, disturbing playlist is like one of my most watched playlists. People just can't get enough of it for some reason, but yeah, I'll have stuff to say about Angel's Melancholy, and I know this is one they've been waiting for, so stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for all the Giallo that's coming in, and thank you for watching.